For those of you who have seen this channel before, you know these videos tend to go into some deep and semi-instructive rabbit holes regarding the possibilities that await the beautiful game. Many of the scenarios have been predicated on continued financial investment, US influence, and media distribution rights, all of which that have culminated in talk of things such as a European Super League. While this may happen soon, or in a while, or indeed never, nothing demonstrates the potential shifts in the football landscape more than the European Super League initiative, something which must come into the thinking of boardrooms of football league federations across Europe and indeed the rest of the world. During this endeavour of bringing you reasonably well-researched videos with, let's say, less than accomplished production values, an area of particular interest, it seems, dear viewer, according to my viewership figures anyway, are cross-border leagues. Perhaps this interest exists because they are mostly unknown and potentially exciting. The idea could be liberating, it could be soulless, it could be dangerous, it could offer protection against a European Super League, it could be an acceleration towards one. It may well depend on where it is and who is involved. Whatever it is, they are, I think, intriguing. So I'm about to embark on a small series concentrating on neighbouring leagues that have cross-border potential and evaluate if, why, and how these could work and whether it could be a net positive thing. So, sit back and come with me on the first one as we delve into a cross-border league that has already come tantalisingly close to fruition. We're going to talk about the Netherlands and Belgium.
Now, top clubs in the Belgian Pro League have voted in favour of an agreement in principle for a cross-border league with the Dutch Eredivisie, dubbed the BeneLiga.
In 2020, the Belgium Jupiler League signed an agreement approving the motion to combine with the Dutch Eredivisie. An 18-team league was proposed, comprising of 10 top Dutch sides and 8 top Belgium sides, with the remaining sides not included dropping into a second tier of 16 teams. This was purported as great news for many, an exciting development that helped the region close the gap on Europe's big four leagues, i.e. England, Spain, Germany and Italy. The BeneLiga, as it was dubbed, looked like it might finally become Europe's first joint cross-border men's soccer league.
I think the reform and the reformatting of the European leagues is pushing towards this, because I think Belgian and Dutch clubs fear that they might have less European tickets in the new situation. So the Belgian top clubs and some Dutch top clubs are in favor of this, but they will need to convince everybody.
However, after a year's worth of negotiations in Holland, the Dutch clubs decided to pull out of the merger. A statement from the Eredivisie claimed, and I quote, "The Dutch top clubs are now stopping the project because the necessary support within Dutch football is lacking." There is not much detail as to why the Dutch Eredivisie ultimately decided against this move. It is not clear either if this was solely the top Dutch clubs who pulled out or if there was not enough support from the smaller sides. What is clear, however, is that those in Belgium were keen for this to get going on the basis that it would make sense on many levels, particularly the increased revenue through commercial deals due to a better league and a bigger market. One can only assume that too many of the Dutch teams did not see enough upside to fully motivate them into this merger. In 2023, the Dutch Eredivisie signed a 180 million annual deal with ESPN for domestic broadcast rights, dwarfing the amounts made to other leagues such as the Scottish Premier League, for instance. Perhaps more relevant here is that the big Dutch clubs like Ajax commanding 13% and PSV commanding 10% of any revenue. They may well have been using talk of a merger as a stalking horse for upcoming terms in the ESPN agreement. Also to take note of here, the smaller teams in the Dutch Eredivisie receive as little as 3% of this revenue. So with Holland's top teams standing to take a sizable portion of a shiny new domestic deal, and the smaller teams set to not gain a huge amount from a merger, as well as a potential demotion to a second tier to boot, you can understand the indifference on the Dutch side. When looking at the distribution of the proposed new deal, it is not clear actually that the smaller teams stood to make net gains at all, unlike the larger ones. This may explain the year's worth of internal wrangling of the Eredivisie, stuck between the smaller clubs wanting to see more financial benefit and the larger ones refusing to give up their large share of the revenue. Whatever the minutiae of this, what is clear is that ultimately for this to happen, the Belgium Jupiler League would have to bring something more to the table to make this worthwhile for the Dutch Eredivisie. What we can also assume is that with the top clubs unwilling to budge on their share of the pie, the only real option is to create a bigger pie than the one previously proposed. The population of Belgium and Holland is finite, and although the countries could potentially get a bigger domestic TV deal through a merger, there is a ceiling on the long-term growth here. Where there is potential growth, however, is non-domestic TV rights, an area that the English Premier League is relying on for its growth in the next 10 to 15 years, particularly in places like the US. While these are very different leagues with vastly different commercial weightings, non-domestic rights are still an area for exploitation by smaller leagues. Should the Eredivisie and Jupiler leagues reassess their situation and choose to restructure, it seems that would be the right time to make a play for this. So with this in mind, we can ask ourselves the question, what nuance or valuable commodity does the Jupiler League have that others do not? And how can this complement the strengths of the Dutch league and tradition? And actually, there is more than one string to the bow of the Jupiler League setup that is really quite unique. If we look at the competitive advantages Holland and Belgium have as footballing nations, one thing sticks out like a sore thumb. As a geographic area, it is pound for pound one of, if not the best conveyor belt for young talent in the world. Having spoken to Premier League academies in the last few years, they will often tell me Belgium continues to produce excellent young players, often superior to traditional powerhouses such as Germany and Spain. Their national team, underachieving as it has been full of stars for the last 10 or 15 years. You could have made an argument 5 years ago that Belgium had the strongest starting 11 in the world. Not bad for a country with a population of just over 10 million people. The Dutch academy system speaks for itself, and is already recognised as a world leader in this regard, and has been for as long as most of us can remember. The famous Ajax youth system and forward-thinking Dutch footballing philosophies have made a major contribution to the game, which quite rightly is recognised by most football fans who are old enough to remember someone other than Man City winning a title. But it is not just the development of young players in these countries that sets the area apart. Belgium in more recent times has become a prime target for Premier League clubs to invest in team ownership and filtering talented players through from around the world. Brighton and Hove Albion have done this with Karim Matoma and Casado with great effect. Belgian rules allow English clubs to obtain work permits for players from outside of Europe for a designated period, at which point they can be brought across to the UK. It is clear also after a recent vote among Premier League clubs, the green light has been given to allow these kinds of feeder club transactions, so we can only expect more. Due to the price Belgium teams are available for, their experience with developing young players and close proximity to England, Belgium will remain a prime target for Premier League and Championship clubs to buy into. Newcastle have reportedly been in talks to buy Ostend, and have also made inquiries about one of Belgium's biggest clubs, Standard Liège. Matt Slater from The Athletic reported that Newcastle faced rivalry from Wolves and one other English club to buy Ostend. This club, incidentally, was Bournemouth, according to The Guardian. There is no doubt this is a matter of when, not if. Now, from a Belgian point of view, this runs the very real risk of being disrespectful, using their league and respected footballing traditions as a feeder to the Premier League. That seems a perfectly reasonable assertion to make, and I wouldn't want to second guess this too much. But also, thinking about this purely from a practical perspective, this is something to perhaps consider. If the Premier League wants to buy into and invest in the Belgian League, then in essence, you have a hotbed of young footballing talent residing within spitting distance of the world's most powerful and lucrative league, a commercial juggernaut that is looking to make an investment in you. Depending on your outlook, this is a real threat or a giant opportunity. Like most of these things, it's probably a bit of both. However, with a European Super League still potentially on the horizon, leagues around the world are looking for relevance and perhaps even safety in numbers. A BeneLiga would help in this regard, and the continued interest from the English League may be their ticket to enabling it. I see two potential scenarios that could get a BeneLiga over the line, and actually these focus more on what would be the second division rather than the first. If a Premier League team wants to effectively buy and own a Belgian one, like Brighton's Tony Bloom has done, the BeneLiga could insist that they would need to commit their under-23 side to the second tier of the newly combined league. Someone will have to crunch the numbers here, but it's not unreasonable to think this would make the television rights more desirable to certain fans of Premier League clubs. Not by a huge amount, granted, but perhaps enough to make the numbers work. It would certainly give a vested interest in the second tier of any BeneLiga. There are, of course, some more complexities to this. Firstly, travel. It might be an idea that the Premier League under-23s do not play any home games. This means two-tier BeneLiga teams do not have to go to the expense of crossing the channel, but more importantly, the fans do not have to fork out for it either. This is much less of an issue for the Premier League clubs with huge resources and under-23 teams who will have a very limited travelling support anyway. We have seen this type of thing brought into domestic cup competitions in England, where under-23 teams compete with full teams of lower league clubs. So we know this is not completely outrageous. The exposure for these young players is likely to be a good thing for their development, and quite frankly, English teams are going to throw their money around like this. It seems only right that it is harnessed to promote other leagues and the talent that resides within them. Now, whether or not this would provide enough commercial value could be argued over for some time, but really it comes down to one simple question. How many fans of Premier League sides would pay to see their under-23 team compete in a competitive Dutch-Belgium league? Is this enough interest to drive up the value of the distribution rights in the UK? Now, someone who knows what they are doing should be able to test this hypothesis with a reasonable level of accuracy. And here is a second scenario. Belgian clubs who are bought by Premier League clubs could insist that a certain number of their players under an age bracket are made available to them for loan. Now, if I am right in thinking that there will be more investment from the Premier League into Belgium and or Holland, the way you might pique interest with a section of UK football fans is to have a US-style draft system, whereby the team who finishes bottom gets the first pick of the young talent. I would have to say I would probably watch this if there are enough Premier League and clubs from other areas involved supplying the players. It would certainly raise the profile of the league and the players involved. There are a few overarching points for both of these scenarios that hold true. One of the strongest cases for something like this is that a league like the Premier League will continue to stockpile young players. This is not good. You only need to see how Jude Bellingham, Jadon Sancho, even Kevin De Bruyne flourished when given an opportunity to play first-team football regularly, the kind of opportunity Premier League clubs were not willing to give them. From what I know about the inner workings of the football world, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So many young players are stockpiled and released, never to be seen again. The opportunity to play first-team football and to gain some exposure should not be underestimated in terms of what that can do for their career, whether it be at the top of the game, which is highly unlikely generally, or making a career for themselves in the lower leagues, something I think many players are capable of doing, but end up out of the game altogether. The other big point to reiterate here, of course, is if bigger clubs are going to throw their weight around and hunt down the smaller ones, it only seems right that the game is progressed as a result of this and somehow is protected as a result of this and nurtured as a result of this. And there is a way that this can be done if leagues are integrated and things are thought about in a certain way. And this sort of arrangement ticks a few of those boxes. In an ideal world, it would be the Dutch and Belgian fans who would have the final say as to if any joint league should happen. It needs to be clear why it would be of more benefit and make for a better league that can grow in the future. Without the buy-in from the fans, this would unravel very quickly. And for a region so adept at creating football philosophy and tradition, you would wager that any decision made would be for the benefit of the majority and promotion of the game itself. There are moving parts here, so any decision is not necessarily black and white, But there is little doubt that this small region of the world that has punched above its weight in footballing terms for so long will continue to have opportunities all of its own.